Recently, and by recently I mean like 8 months ago, I had never had an experience before this. I moved to an island in the South Pacific and have gotten the hiking bug, so I try and get out to new locations as much as I possibly can, what with work eating into my precious time. This happened about 2 weeks ago. Since I live in the South Pacific region, it gets mighty hot, driving even the most insane hikers indoors, unless it's at night. Of course, I'm not a masochist, so I try to do all my hiking in the early hours of the morning, or in the evening when it starts getting cool. I've never been afraid of going hiking by myself. I did it when I lived in Oregon, and never ran into any problems with it. But my island isn't my friendly home state. I always carry pepper spray, and when I used to go hiking in Montana and Wyoming, I would sometimes carry a handgun to ward off anything I couldn't take on, whether it was a bear or a person. But I had always gotten off considerably lucky. I got to the trailhead at about 6:30 in the evening. The trail was called 1,000 Steps, but in all honesty, it was mostly just a walk straight down to the cliff and then a grueling journey back up. I didn't want to go, but my dog, Mad Moxie, needed to be walked, and I had done this hike so many times I could probably do it in my sleep. The first thing I noticed when I pulled up was an old, rickety, rusted-out blue pickup truck with a big plastic tarp over the bed to keep out the rain. These are pretty common on the island, affectionately earning them the name Guam Bombs. I didn't think much of it as I hooked up Moxie and started heading down the trail, trying my best to ignore the mosquitoes that were making a meal out of my exposed neck. Heading down the trail was relatively easy, avoiding the banana spider webs. I felt the stress of my day slowly unwind as the underbrush grew darker and night approached. I made it all the way down to the water's edge when I noticed a man standing about 100 yards away. It was dark enough now that I could only see his silhouette, so I have no idea if he was looking at me or at the water, but I chose to ignore him and instead pull Moxie's ball from my backpack and throw it for her a few times to get all her wiggles out. After some time, the man started walking over to me and stopped maybe about 10 feet away. Now, I'm not a tiny woman. I'm 23 years old and I stand at about 5'6", and this guy was just a couple of inches taller than me. But most of the locals were on the smaller side, but something about him just felt weird. Evening, I greeted as he nodded and looked down at Moxie, who had just returned from running after her ball. I stooped down to pet her now humidity-soaked head as the man kept his eyes trained on my dog. "Can I help you, sir?" "Pretty dog," he responded mildly.
You alone?
"I have my dog." Trying to sound braver than I was feeling, "I'm never alone." I tried to emphasize on the fact that I had my dog with me, but the man seemed unfazed by my statement.
Oh, have a good night.
With that, he turned around and started walking back towards the trailhead. I watched his shadow disappear into the trees and waited for about half an hour before I started walking back towards the path, my mind on high alert as Moxie pulled me through the trees and up the cliffside. The crickets pierced the night as I climbed the steps, illuminated by my flashlight. My hands were full with Moxie's leash and my light, but you could bet your buns that I would have pepper spray out if I had an extra hand. Finally, my light pierced the trees at the top, and I practically booked it up the hill. When I got to the top, I nearly shat myself. The rusted blue pickup truck was sitting in the parking lot still, but their passenger side door was practically touching my car's driver's side. Inside the car, I could faintly see two men sitting in the cab, and I could feel them watching me. Slowly, I approached my car, walking as far over to the passenger side as I could, and kept Moxie with me as I opened the door and crawled over to the driver's side. At that moment, the door of the pickup truck flew open and my dog started going apeshit, barking at the two people who were now outside of the car and trying to break into mine. Hard in my throat, I rammed the keys into the ignition and tore out of the parking lot so quickly, I nearly took my mirror off. I called my mom as soon as I got home, and she begged me to call the police. Unfortunately, the police here on the island aren't as vigilant as they are on the mainland, and that area is known for car thefts, mugging, and other debaucheries, as I learned from my coworkers later that week. Earlier this month, another girl actually disappeared from that area without a trace, and it makes me wonder if the men in the blue pickup truck didn't have something to do with it. If I hadn't had Moxie with me, would I have been mugged or worse? If I learned anything from this experience, it's that for my lady hikers, please always take pepper spray with you, go hiking in groups, and always let someone know where you're going. It might save your life someday. And to the men in the pickup truck, let's never meet again. Also, I did call the cops about the missing female and the truck I saw. They said they would investigate into it. So far I haven't heard anything, but I fear for this woman's life and realize how easily it could have been my own. Also, I realize that hiking alone, especially as a female, is a dangerous pastime, and I do realize again how foolish and naive I was being. But I have learned, and plan not on hiking alone anymore. This is my first time posting here on Reddit. I'm a 33-year-old white female from Los Angeles. 3 years ago, my boyfriend and I, as planned for 5 years, turned 30. We sold everything we owned, including my car, took his Trailblazer, and decided to just travel around the States and Canada. I guess you could call us backpackers, as we tend to chase good weather, find a state park, and backcountry hike into the wilderness for days at a time. My brother likes to joke that we are anti-establishment hippies. We don't necessarily live off the grid, but between the two of us, we have one prepaid phone we use for emergencies or checking in with family and friends, and one MacBook, which I use for work. I'm a freelance writer, and I am on retainer with robotics company. I mostly write boring white papers or web content. The whole point of our living situation is to live debt-free and have as few bills as possible. I only use free Wi-Fi, so 1 to 2 times a week we have to go to a city with a Starbucks. This background info is only important so you know more about who we are and how simply we live. Neither of us is involved in social media, and know very little of Reddit or Instagram, or use any apps, because our phone isn't a smartphone. We don't even text. Last summer we decided to do some backcountry hiking in Arkansas. It's one of those states you don't ever really hear about other hikers visiting, but we read that it had some beautiful natural landscape, and it does. The rules at this particular park were pretty lax. We didn't need a permit. There were a few basic laws and guidelines, but there was no check-in needed. We had all the basics and had planned to do a 6-day hike, 3 in and 3 out. The whole time we were out there, we didn't see or hear another soul. But on day 1, we were prepping to move off trail and find a camping spot as it was getting near dusk. About half a mile off the trail is usually the standard for us. We took what looked like kind of an animal trail, and about half a mile out, we saw a green 2-person tent. It was almost camouflaged in the foliage, so we came on it almost by accident. Some backpackers prefer privacy, others are more social. We're the more social type. We've had some great experiences camping near other backpackers, sharing stories, food, and a joint or two. We were around 30 yards away from the tent. It was zipped closed, so my boyfriend shouted a greeting to make our presence known. No movement and no sound. We assumed Green Tent Guy either wasn't around or didn't want to be bothered, so we started off in a new direction to get some distance between us. We camped, never heard a peep. We moved along the next morning, completely forgetting about Green Tent Guy, until nearing the end of day 5 on our trek back. We were again looking for a spot to camp off the trail when we came up on the green tent again. This isn't that unusual, but normally backcountry hikers keep moving, so we really weren't expecting it. The tent flap was open, so my boyfriend yells his greeting again. and nothing. My boyfriend wants to go check it out, saying it's weird and maybe someone is hurt. I didn't like that idea from the get-go, because even though we hadn't had any bad experiences personally, we'd heard enough stories from other backpackers about hermits and mountain men that want privacy, carry guns, etc. But my boyfriend assured me we'd be fine, and if all else fails, offer him some weed to keep the peace, and we'd go on our way. As soon as we get within 20 yards of the place, the smell of decomposition is intense. My boyfriend had been hailing his greeting over the last 20 yards, and once the smell hits him, he stops and turns to me and says, "What if we find a dead body?" My skin crawled. I was immediately afraid. I've never seen a dead body before, and I don't want to. The closer we got to the tent, the worse the smell got. I knew for sure we were going to walk in and see some old camper's rotting corpse. What we found was worse than that. Outside the tent was a dead doe's legs, all 4 of them covered in flies. It looked like the legs had been cut most of the way, and then ripped off the rest of the way. It was a mess. Inside was the body and head of the deer, but the middle portion was swaddled in a blue fleece blanket that was blood-soaked at the bottom, where the legs used to be. It was laying on its side, bottom facing the tent entry. The tail had been cut off, and the anus and vagina was covered in dried blood and a gape, like something had been penetrating it. The same with its mouth. The bottom portion was bent down at a scary, broken-looking angle. The tent was open so we could see everything without having to go inside. Not that we would have anyway, because at this point the smell was almost debilitating. There was a dirty, almost empty clear bottle of Jergens baby oil and a stained green and white fringed kitchen towel. That was it. I immediately started crying and begged him to go. All he could muster was, "What the fuck?" And we turned and ran. We ran to the trail and jogged down it for as far as we could go until dusk was fully on us, and we had to set up camp. We didn't go very far off the trail, and neither of us slept. We didn't start a fire or use headlamps after full dark. We just set up whispering to each other, going over and over what we had just seen. Every little noise startled us. It was like our brains were on red alert. I kept thinking any moment a dead deer rapist would come back to his tent, see our footprints or something, know we were there, and track us back to our tent. I've never been so scared in my entire life. Just before dawn, we tore down and started out. My boyfriend stopped at the ranger station on our way out of the park to report what we had seen. The ranger was a young guy around our age, and he looked as freaked out by our story as we were telling it. He wrote most of it down, and my boyfriend showed him on a map approximately where it had been. He asked if we knew how the deer was killed, and at that point, we hadn't even thought about it. We just assumed it had been shot, but because of the blankets, we didn't see a wound. But we weren't exactly giving it an autopsy either. We have since shortened our backcountry hikes to a maximum of 4 days. We've also been a lot less eager to call out to other campsites, and have never approached another unmanned tent again. A few years back, my girlfriend and I, having hiked several other parts of the Appalachian Trail, decided we wanted to give the southern portion of Virginia's trail a shot. It is about 166 miles long and runs through George Washington and Jefferson National Forest from Roanoke County to Pierceburg and Giles County. This is definitely one of the more remote and less traveled parts of the trail, which is exactly what we were looking for. We gathered our gear and made our way to the start of the Virginia Creeper Trail to begin our journey. We had planned our journey to end at Damascus and figured that by the time we got there, we would be more than ready to get home to our own beds. It was early October, and the changing of the leaves and colors were amazing. The air was crisp and cool, perfect hiking weather with beautiful scenery. The majority of the trip was pretty uneventful, just your typical hike, but our last couple of nights, is where things got weird. On this portion of the trail, you are supposed to camp on the trail, or a designated shelter. We didn't really want to run into other people, and didn't want anyone coming up on us in the middle of the night. We decided to ignore those suggestions, and find our own little spot off the trail. A little searching around, and we found a spot a little ways off the trail, in the middle of a small clearing. It was perfect. We set up camp, cooked some food, talked for a while, then snuggled up and went to sleep for the night. Somewhere around 2 a.m., I was awoke by my girlfriend shaking me awake, telling me, "Get your gun, someone is outside walking around our tent." She informed me that she woke up to what sounded like someone right outside the tent, running a knife or something along the side while circling us. When hiking, I carry a 1911 and a judge with me. You never know exactly who or what you might run into when on such a long hike in a remote location. I got the judge out of my pack, and then we sat silently, listening for any sounds. A few minutes of nothing but the breeze blowing through the trees, and then I heard it. Someone or something walked in the woods behind our tent. I got the flashlight and silently made my way out of the tent. Our fire had went out, so it was nearly pitch black, illuminated by only the dim glow of the October moon. I told my girlfriend to stay put while I checked it out. I didn't flick the flashlight on right away, so as to not give away that I was out of the tent and have it become a shining beacon of my location. Instead, I waited to hear more noises. After a few minutes, it sounded like it was a bipedal. Based on the way the steps were paced, I turned on the flashlight and flooded the area with light. I thought I saw someone move behind a tree. I yelled out and told them to go away, and that I was armed. I kept the light on the area with my gun drawn, and slowly approached towards the area where I thought I saw the figure. Then, from my right, I hear what sounds like someone running away through the woods. I spin and face my light that way, and then from the original spot, hear who, or whatever was there, take off into the woods. There's no way I am giving chase, so I return to the campsite. I tell my girlfriend about what happened, and I end up sitting guard outside the tent in the darkness until daybreak. In the morning, I looked around a bit for signs of who or whatever it was, and I discovered a boot print in some soft moist dirt not far from our tent. It wasn't mine, and it wasn't my girl's. This freaked me out as it confirmed that someone, perhaps more than one, was skulking around our tent in the dark. I kept it to myself because I didn't want to freak my girl out any more than she already was. At this point, we were pretty deep in, and still had 2 days left. That day we walked a little faster than normal, and covered as much ground as possible. When it came time to set up camp, I found a spot near a cliff where we could place the tent in a small overhang and prevent anyone from coming up behind us. The whole day up to this point, I had a feeling we were being followed. I had no confirmation of this, and hadn't seen or heard anyone else, but it was just a gut feeling. We set up camp and made some food, then retreated to the tent. I gave my girl the 1911, and I kept the judge right next to me, and I assured her that if I slept at all, it would be with one eye open. After a while, she drifted off to sleep, and I stayed awake listening to the sounds of the woods at night. I was awake for a few hours, just waiting to see if anything was going to happen. At some point, I guess my exhaustion caught up with me, and I drifted off. I awoke some time later to what sounded like someone going through our stuff outside the tent. I grabbed my gun and woke my girlfriend, shushing her to be quiet. From the faint glow of the fire, I could see someone's silhouette against the tent. There really was someone out there. I yelled out to them something along the lines of, "We are armed, get the fuck out of here." They dropped what they were doing and bolted. I came out of the tent, gun drawn and ready to shoot someone. Our stuff was all strewn about. They had rummaged through quite a bit of our stuff. I walked to the edge of the woods in the direction whoever was out there had fled. There was a creek nearby, and I walked to the edge, where there was a small trail running alongside it. Down the creek I could see a light. It looked like a lantern the way it flickered. Then I saw 3 more emerge from the other side of the woods. I told my girlfriend to start packing up whatever she could and that we were leaving. Now. We packed up everything of value, left the tent and a few other items, and headed back onto the trail. In the middle of the night, I kept hearing people talking off in the woods and hearing branches snap for quite some ways. I kept looking behind us every few seconds to make sure nobody was coming up on us. It was completely nerve-wracking. If something happened, we were still a long ways from anywhere and quite literally on our own. Since we hadn't seen another hiker the entire time we had been out here, I really felt we were in serious danger. We had been walking for quite some time when I heard something in the woods behind us. As we rounded a corner, I turned around and saw someone step out onto the trail and just stand there watching us. It was just as the sun was coming up and barely any light. I couldn't make out any features, just the silhouette. I stopped and looked at them for a second and asked them who they were and what they wanted. They just stood there, silently, watching us, and then turned and walked back into the woods. We picked up the pace and kept going, looking back every so often. We didn't see them again, but my gut told me they were still there for quite a ways. We eventually reached the end of the trail and got to where we had parked my girlfriend's car, extremely exhausted. We made it out of the Virginia woods without becoming a meal for a clan of cannibalistic, inbred hillbillies, which is what I pictured happening in my head the whole time. I have no idea who they were, or what they wanted. Maybe it was someone just messing with us. Maybe it really was a clan of deformed hillbillies who were hunting us. I will never know, because I will not be returning to find out. This happened nearly 8 years ago, but I still remember it like it was yesterday. I was walking with my mother around 10 p.m. It was a summer's evening, and we were trying to get some air as it was a scorching day and the house was way too hot. I decided to walk with her down the road, around this roadblock, to get onto a nice path. This was along a normally busy road. However, it was quiet at the time. I crossed with her to the other side of the road, where the roadblock was. To the side of some cement barriers ahead was a small forest-like area in front of a large property not belonging to the owners. Mind you, it was pitch black, and there was only a street light about 100 feet away. We cross over, and I hear a really odd sound. Red flags went off, and I felt my heart sink deep into my chest. "Mom, did you hear that?" She didn't say anything, but I saw the worry and confusion in her eyes. She said, "Turn around, we're going back." What we heard was a deep growl, something short but fierce. It continued a couple of times, and we quickly turned around. I started running, but she couldn't run due to health issues. I turned around after a short sprint and saw, I kid you not, a large black figure on all fours creep up from behind the barrier we were at seconds prior. I started sweating really bad and almost shit myself. "Mom, what the hell was that? Run, please!" She started to speed walk, and I watched as the figure got up on 2 legs and jumped into the forest. This thing looked like a man in some sort of gorilla suit. We booked it home and decided to just open the windows for fresh air that night. We never came across anything like that in our area again, but deeper into the mountain area of the city, there was an ape man who reportedly would terrorize women who would run on the trail.